Hello, I'm Nara Chagas and we are starting now another edition of What's Happening in Brazil. And we will start by talking about the latest events in the country. Last Sunday, the national elections to Brazil's Child Protective Service took place. The agency is responsible for defending the rights of children and teenagers. It receives and investigates denounces of mistreatment or rights violations. According to the government, there was an increase of about 10% in participation in this year's election. Voting is optional. Also last Sunday, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was discharged from the hospital after undergoing hip replacement surgery. According to the most recent medical report, Lula presented a good clinical response. Now he will only make outpatient rehabilitation. Last week, a parliamentary commission of inquiry targeting the landless workers movement was concluded. The inquiry ended up without an approved final report, confirming the failure of the pro-Bolsonaro far-right at the Chamber of Deputies. Since 2004, 5 commissions were installed to investigate the movement in an attempt to criminalize it, but to no avail. On October 30, Petrobras celebrates its 7th year being smaller than it ever was. On the last decade, the country's largest company had part of its spoil privatized, cut investments, and part of its staff. Founded in 1953 by then-President Getúlio Vargas, it was based on the nationalist slogan, "The oil is ours." The company has signaled intentions to regain its relevance in the national economy. 25 female federal deputies wrote a letter to President Lula to pressure him to choose a black woman for replacing Minister Rosa Weber in the Supreme Court. They argued that appointing a black woman would be important to democratize Brazilian judicial power. Today, Brazil has no black woman in this position. Brazil has an important tool to combat contemporary slavery, the dirty list of slave labor. Employers on this list can, for instance, access public financing. However, justice removed 40 names from the list in 5 years. To some of the cases, the argument used was that there wasn't, in fact, slave labor. These decisions concern professionals who work on tackling labor exploitation.
In 5 years, Brazilian justice removed 40 employers from the dirty list of slave labor, whether through an injunction or sentence. The unprecedented survey is part of the article "The Hidden Face of the Dirty List of Slave Labor" and summarizes the arguments used by magistrates to cover slave labor cases in the country between March 2017 and April 2022.
It's a white elite, frequently sexist, patriarchal, and racist, that doesn't believe in the existence nowadays of such degrading work conditions, or believes these people are there because they chose it. They could have run away, they could have got out.
In 10% of the cases, the argument the judiciary power used was the non-existence of slave labor.
Actually, in cases like this, Brazil's judicial power should act to prevent an error and not consider other things. If it thinks there is a case of slave labor, so it is. Being listed on the dirty list is a logical act resulting from evaluations by the Ministry of Labor and Employment. So, the judiciary's role should be to analyze any indication of illegality or nullity.
The inclusion of employers have been happening since 2003 and is updated every semester by the Ministry of Labor and Employment. An individual or a company is listed after the conclusion of the administrative proceeding that judges the specific record of slave labor. The International Labour Organization considered the dirty list an excellent measure for combating this kind of crime.
A lista suja foi criada The dirty list was created as a tool so the government wouldn't apply resources or financing from the public budget to companies related to slave labor and human rights violations. It happened because of the credibility of the work developed and the credibility of the dirty list itself. It took on much broader social proportions, including private banks adopting the dirty list as an indicator of risk for granting credit, also internationally.
However, the article shows that the main argument used by magistrates to get employers removed from the dirty list in 43% of the cases is precisely the impossibility of them receiving public funding.
As empresas, depois de serem flagradas.
After being identified as practicing slave labor, the companies try to get some help by seeking judicial power. After many institutions have verified this kind of situation, they try to reverse it in the judiciary by finding someone who thinks like them. They argue that it is better for the company to continue with these activities and not be included on the dirty list because it will have credit restrictions. Also, they try to cover up the situation that occurred.
Mauricio highlights that the dirty list is also important to prevent whole sectors to get into trouble.
Se a empresa, se os compradores.
If a company, an international trader, or an importer wants to think before negotiating, they can check the dirty list to see who committed crimes, thus avoiding damages to a whole sector, such as what happened to Brazil's coffee sector. By the way, it has some cases in the dirty list as well as the orange sector. Therefore, the dirty list prevents whole economic sectors from being harmed when trading.
After a long debate in the Chamber of Deputies Commission, the vote on the prohibition of same-sex marriage in Brazil was postponed. Now, a working group will be created to discuss the issue that engaged the LGBTQIA+ community against the suppression of rights acquired more than a decade ago.
Last week, the Chamber of Deputies scheduled the voting of a bill to annul the unanimous decision of the Supreme Court on civil same-sex marriage. However, after popular pressure, it was postponed. Now, a working group is discussing possible changes in the text. The relief with the postponement wasn't enough to end worries among the progressive field, which requested the bill to be filed due to having many distortions.
É a diversidade que nos faz humano.
Diversity is what makes us humans. Their intention is to deny diversity and humanity. It's quite clear in the pastor's speech when he voted. He said that marriage comes from a natural right. If it is so only to straight people, he is dehumanizing men who love other men, women who love other women, and who have the right to love and live with whomever they want.
Arguments used by Pastor Eurico in the report were repeated by his conservative friends at Congress. Besides an alleged biological bias in the recognition of marriage, a supposed judicial activism by the Supreme Court was mentioned, so as the inability of the progressive field to reach a majority to impose changes to the Constitution.
Não se pode citar.
You can cite experts from the Constitution, but the whole Constitution. The constitutional amendment is broad and it says that we are all the same.
Like other social habit issues being discussed, which include abortion and drug consumption, same-sex marriage is also distorted and misrepresented through religious bias. During a public hearing held soon before the postponement, unisex bathrooms, sexual education in schools, and even same-sex marriage in churches were mentioned, topics that has no relation to the civil rights already guaranteed to about 80,000 couples whose marriage has been validated by law since 2011.
Nós não queremos casar na igreja.
We don't want to get married in a church. We want a civil wedding, which guarantees my husband's rights if I die. This way, he can stay with the goods and prevent them from ending up with my family. Often, our partners' families are prejudiced and want to take all the things we acquire together. We need equal marriage regarding health, health insurance, and issues related to daily life in any heterosexual household.
Despite the smokescreen, progressive parliamentarians believe the issue have already advanced a lot and tends to be pacified.
Regardless of the debates that Your Excellencies hold in this House, our love will remain firm and strong. We will remain standing, loving, kissing, and feeling our desires, which are not about choices or options. Just as Your Excellencies did not choose to be cisgender or heterosexual, we also did not choose to be transsexuals, travestites, or homosexuals.
Não tem a ver com privilégio, eles tentam...
It is not about privileges. They try to frame the issue perversely like this. It is not about privileges, but the right to exist, having rights acknowledged, and being far from hostility, prejudice, and violence. Although we have achieved a lot of things, violence persists. That's why there is a project like this, which does not recognize same-sex marriages. Therefore, it is a reaction to these achievements and, at the same time, has a tone of mockery, insensitivity, and antipathy. I call it the petrification of the heart. The heart is made of stone and cannot respect others.
Did you like the show? So hit the like button and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to receive notifications. We'll see you next week.